Amy stood in her driveway at 6 in the morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She had a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a box of old books in the other. Today was the day. She was finally going through her mom's things and letting go of what she couldn't keep. It had been 4 months since her mother passed away. 4 long months of sorting through a lifetime of memories, deciding what to pack, what to donate, and what to sell. The house still felt too quiet without her mom's laughter, without the smell of her famous cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. But life had to go on, and Amy knew her mom would have wanted her to move forward, not stay stuck in the past. She'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing for this yard sale, going through boxes, pricing items, making sure everything was clean and presentable. Her mother had been a collector of beautiful things: vintage dishes, old records, handmade quilts, books from every decade, things that deserved to go to people who would appreciate them, not just sit in storage gathering dust. Amy had moved to this neighborhood only 6 months ago, right before her mom got really sick. She'd wanted to be closer to help with doctor appointments and daily care. The neighbors seemed nice enough, though she hadn't really gotten to know anyone yet. Between work and taking care of her mom, there hadn't been much time for socializing. She'd wave hello, exchange small talk about the weather, but that was about it. She started setting up the tables she'd borrowed from a friend, laying out the dishes carefully, arranging the books by genre, hanging the quilts over a portable rack so people could see the beautiful patterns. By 7:30, everything looked perfect. She'd even made little signs with prices, trying to keep everything reasonable. This wasn't about making money. It was about finding good homes for her mother's treasures. The first customer arrived around 8. An older gentleman who spent 20 minutes talking about how his late wife had collected similar dishes. He left with a box full of china and tears in his eyes, thanking Amy for keeping the prices so low. It felt good. This was exactly what she'd hoped for. More people started showing up. A young couple looking for furniture. A mom with 3 kids who got excited about the old toys. A teenager who couldn't believe the vintage band t-shirts. Amy found herself smiling, sharing little stories about the items, watching people light up when they found something special. That's when she noticed her. A woman walking briskly across the street headed straight for Amy's driveway. She looked about 50, with perfectly styled hair, a designer workout outfit, and an expression that could freeze water. She was carrying a clipboard. An actual clipboard at 8:45 on a Saturday morning. Amy didn't recognize her, but something about the way she walked screamed trouble. The woman marched right up to Amy, not even bothering with a hello. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and loud enough that several customers turned to look. "Are you the homeowner here?" Amy set down the book she was holding. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "I'm Brenda Richardson. I'm on the HOA board." She said it like it was supposed to mean something important, like she'd just announced she was the mayor. "I need to see your permit for this sale." Amy blinked. "Permit? It's just a yard sale." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Our HOA has very strict rules about commercial activities on residential properties. You can't just decide to run a business out of your driveway without proper authorization." "It's not a business," Amy explained, trying to keep her voice calm even though her heart was starting to race. "It's a one-day yard sale. I'm selling my mother's things. That's what they all say." Brenda started walking around, examining the tables, taking photos with her phone. "This looks pretty extensive to me. Multiple tables, significant inventory. Did you post advertisements?" "I put up a few signs at the corners, yes. That's what people do for yard sales." A couple who'd been looking at the records quietly slipped away. Amy felt her stomach sink. This woman was scaring off her customers. Brenda pulled out a thick binder from her oversized purse and started flipping through pages. Section 12, paragraph 7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that any sale of goods on the property requires written approval submitted at least 14 days in advance. "Did you submit such a request?" "I didn't know I needed to. I've only lived here 6 months and I've never seen anything about that." "Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse," Brenda said, still taking photos. "You received the HOA packet when you moved in, didn't you?" Amy had received something, yes. A massive envelope full of papers that she'd glanced through while unpacking. But that was back when her mom was still alive. When life was busy and chaotic and reading through 50 pages of neighborhood bylaws wasn't exactly a priority. "Look," Amy said, feeling her patience starting to wear thin. "My mother just passed away a few months ago." I'm trying to find good homes for her belongings. It's one day. Just today. I'm not hurting anyone. Brenda's expression didn't soften even a little. I'm sorry for your loss, but personal circumstances don't exempt you from the rules. These bylaws exist to maintain property values and neighborhood standards. If we let one person break them, everyone will want to. Break them? It's a yard sale, not a crime scene. The rules are the rules. Brenda snapped another photo of the tables. I'm filing a formal complaint with the board. You'll be hearing from us. I strongly suggest you shut this down immediately to avoid additional penalties. Amy felt heat rising in her cheeks. She'd dealt with difficult people before, but this was something else. This woman was standing in her driveway threatening her, on one of the hardest days she'd had since her mom died. I'm not shutting anything down, Amy said quietly but firmly. I'm not breaking any actual laws. I'm having a yard sale on my own property. Brenda's eyebrows shot up. So you're choosing to be deliberately defiant. That's going to make this much worse for you. The HOA has the authority to issue fines, and trust me, we will. She turned on her heel and walked away, still taking photos as she went. Amy watched her march back across the street to a house with an immaculate lawn and not a single leaf out of place. The few remaining customers looked uncomfortable. One by one, they made their excuses and left. Amy stood alone in her driveway, surrounded by her mother's things, fighting back tears. She'd just wanted one simple day. One day to honor her mom's memory and pass along these beautiful objects to people who'd appreciate them. Instead, she got threatened and humiliated by some power-hungry neighbor with a clipboard. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. Part of her wanted to pack everything up and hide. The other part, the part that sounded a lot like her mother's voice in her head, told her to stand her ground. Her mom had always said that bullies only win when good people back down. Amy took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went back to arranging the books. She wasn't going anywhere. If this Brenda woman wanted a fight, she'd get one. Amy just hoped she was ready for what came next, because Brenda Richardson had no idea who she was actually messing with. Amy managed to keep the yard sale going for the rest of the day, though her heart wasn't really in it anymore. A few brave souls stopped by in the afternoon, and she was grateful for their business. One of them, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down, spent almost an hour browsing and chatting. Don't let Brenda get to you, Mrs. Chen said quietly as she paid for a set of vintage teacups. She's done this to half the neighborhood. Last year, she reported the Johnsons for having their garbage cans visible from the street. Made them build a special enclosure. Cost them $2,000. Amy's eyes widened. For garbage cans? Oh, that's nothing. She reported the family on Maple Street because their Christmas lights were up 3 days past New Year's. Threatened them with daily fines. Mrs. Chen shook her head. The woman has nothing better to do than patrol the neighborhood looking for violations. Why doesn't anyone stop her? She's on the HOA board. Has been for 8 years. Most people just try to stay off her radar. Mrs. Chen patted Amy's hand. But I like what you're doing here, dear. Your mother's things are beautiful. Don't let that woman bully you. After Mrs. Chen left, Amy felt a little better. At least she wasn't alone in this. Sunday morning brought a surprise.
Amy woke up to find an email in her inbox.
The subject line read, "Formal complaint, violation of HOA bylaws, urgent response required." Her coffee suddenly tasted bitter. The email was from Brenda, but she'd copied 5 other people who Amy assumed were the other board members. The message was 3 pages long, 3 pages about a yard sale. Brenda had attached no fewer than 37 photos, close-ups of the tables, wide shots of the driveway, even a photo of Amy's sign at the corner of the street. She documented everything like she was gathering evidence for a criminal trial. The email described Amy's yard sale as an unauthorized commercial operation, a flagrant violation of community standards, and a threat to neighborhood property values. Brenda demanded immediate action, including a $500 fine for the first offense, a cease and desist order, and a warning that future violations would result in escalating penalties, $500. For selling her dead mother's dishes. Amy's hands shook as she read through the whole thing. Brenda had even included a section about how new residents need to understand that this community has standards, and how allowing this behavior sets a dangerous precedent. The worst part was the last paragraph. Brenda had scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting for Wednesday evening to discuss the situation and demanded Amy's attendance to answer for her actions. Amy felt sick. She'd grown up watching her mom handle difficult situations with grace and strength, but this felt overwhelming. She was still grieving, still trying to figure out her new normal, and now she had to defend herself at some kind of neighborhood tribunal. She spent Sunday in a fog, barely able to focus on anything. Monday at work was even worse. She was a remote worker, which usually meant she could concentrate, but today her mind kept drifting back to that email, to Brenda's smug face, to the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in her own driveway. Monday afternoon, another email arrived. This one was from someone named Douglas Perry, who identified himself as the HOA president. The tone was more professional than Brenda's, but the message was clear. Amy was expected at Wednesday's meeting. Failure to appear would result in the board making a decision without her input. That evening, Amy was taking out her trash when her neighbor from next door called out to her. "Hey there, I'm Tom. I live right next door, can't believe we haven't properly met yet." Tom looked like he was in his 40s with a friendly smile and paint-stained jeans. He walked over to the fence between their yards. "I saw what happened Saturday," he said, his voice sympathetic, "with Brenda and the yard sale. That was rough." Amy felt her throat tighten. "Yeah, it wasn't the best day. Listen, I just want you to know that most of us think Brenda's completely out of line. She does this constantly. My wife and I put up a bird feeder last spring, and Brenda tried to say it violated some bylaw about lawn ornaments. We had to fight with her for 2 months. Did you win? Eventually. But only because we found out her interpretation of the bylaw was completely wrong. She just likes being in charge and making people miserable." He hesitated. "Are you going to the meeting Wednesday?" "I guess I have to." "Well, if you need someone in your corner, let me know. Brenda's been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for too long. A lot of us are tired of it." Amy thanked him and went inside, feeling slightly less alone. But that small comfort evaporated Tuesday morning when she found another email. This one had an attachment, an official-looking document titled Notice of Violation and Pending Fine. The document laid out Brenda's complaints in formal legal language. It cited specific bylaw sections and subsections. It outlined the proposed $500 fine and warned of additional penalties if Amy failed to appear at the meeting or if she committed any future violations. At the bottom was a note. Failure to pay assessed fines within 30 days may result in a lien being placed on your property. A lien. On her house. Because she'd sold some of her mom's old dishes. Amy stared at the document for a long time. She thought about her mother, about how strong she'd been through her illness, how she never let anyone push her around. Her mom had taught her to stand up for herself, to fight for what was right even when it was hard. Tuesday afternoon, Amy was watering her front plants when another neighbor approached. A younger guy, probably in his late 20s, walking a golden retriever. "You're Amy, right? I'm Kevin, I live 2 streets over." He seemed nervous. "I heard about what Brenda's doing to you. The yard sale thing. News travels fast around here, huh? It's a small neighborhood. Everyone knows everything." He glanced around like he was worried someone might hear. "Look, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but Brenda did the same thing to me last year. I was selling my old car, had it parked in my driveway with a for sale sign. She reported me, said it was commercial activity, cost me $300 in fines before I finally sold the car and got her off my back. That's insane." "It is. But here's the thing." He lowered his voice. "I don't think half the stuff she claims is actually in the bylaws. I think she just makes things up and nobody bothers to check. She counts on people being too intimidated to fight back." Amy felt something shift inside her, a spark of anger that pushed through the anxiety and grief. "Do you still have your copy of the HOA bylaws?" "Yeah, somewhere. Why?" "Because I think it's time someone actually read them." Kevin grinned. "I'll drop them off tonight." True to his word, Kevin came by that evening with a thick binder. The official HOA bylaws, all 83 pages of them. Amy made coffee and settled in at her kitchen table. She read every single page, and the more she read, the angrier she got. There was indeed a section about sales on residential properties, but it wasn't anything like what Brenda had described. The bylaw was about running ongoing businesses from home, like opening a retail shop or operating a commercial service. It said nothing about yard sales. In fact, there was a specific exemption for occasional personal sales events. Brenda had lied. Or at the very least, she'd twisted the rules to fit her agenda. Amy kept reading. By midnight, she had a notebook full of notes. She'd found the actual rules about complaints and meetings, about how fines had to be approved, about residents' rights to appeal. She'd also found something interesting. A section about board member conduct, about how board members were supposed to act in good faith, follow proper procedures, and treat all residents fairly. Amy leaned back in her chair, thinking. Wednesday's meeting was tomorrow. Brenda was expecting her to show up scared and apologetic, ready to accept whatever punishment the board decided. But Amy wasn't going to do that. She thought about her mom again. About the way she'd faced her illness with courage, never giving up, always fighting for one more day, one more moment. Her mom wouldn't want her to roll over for some bully with a clipboard. Amy pulled out her laptop and started typing. If Brenda wanted a meeting, she'd get one. But it wasn't going to go the way Brenda expected. Not even close. By 2 a.m, Amy had written a 10-page response document. She'd cited specific bylaws, highlighted the contradictions in Brenda's complaint, and outlined several concerning patterns in how Brenda had handled other residents' issues. She attached copies of the relevant bylaw sections, screenshots of Brenda's accusatory emails, and statements from neighbors about similar incidents. Then she hit send, copying all the board members. She didn't sleep much that night. But when Wednesday morning arrived, Amy felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt ready to fight. The community center meeting room smelled like stale coffee and floor cleaner. Amy arrived 15 minutes early, her leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She'd dressed professionally, business casual, wanting to look put together and confident even though her heart was hammering in her chest. She wasn't the only one there early. At least 20 neighbors had shown up, filling the chairs along the walls. Tom waved at her from the back row. Kevin gave her a thumbs up. Mrs. Chen smiled encouragingly. Amy was surprised by how many people had come. Brenda was already seated at the long table at the front of the room, looking like she'd prepared for a court case. She had multiple binders stacked in front of her, sticky notes flagging various pages. When she saw Amy walk in, her lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Glad you could make it," Brenda said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Shows you're at least willing to take responsibility for your actions." Amy didn't respond. She took a seat in the front row and opened her portfolio, reviewing her notes one more time. The other board members filtered in over the next few minutes. Douglas Perry, the president, was a gray-haired man in his 60s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. There was a younger woman named Jennifer who kept glancing nervously at Brenda, and 2 older men who seemed mostly interested in the cookies someone had brought. At 7 o'clock sharp, Douglas called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to discuss a complaint filed by board member Brenda Richardson regarding a violation of HOA bylaws," he said, reading from a paper in front of him. "Ms. Richardson, would you like to present your case?" Brenda stood up like she was addressing a jury. She launched into a detailed presentation, complete with printed photos that she passed around to the other board members. She described Amy's yard sale as if it had been some kind of illegal operation, emphasizing words like commercial enterprise and flagrant disregard. "This kind of behavior threatens everything we've built in this community," Brenda said, her voice rising with passion. "If we allow residents to simply ignore our bylaws whenever they feel like it, we'll have chaos. Property values will plummet. Our neighborhood will become a free-for-all." She talked for almost 20 minutes. Amy sat quietly, letting her go on. She noticed some of the neighbors rolling their eyes. Tom crossed his arms and shook his head. Finally, Brenda concluded with her recommendation: a $500 fine, a formal written warning, and mandatory approval for any future outdoor activities. "Any future outdoor activities?" one of the board members asked. "That seems a bit excessive. We need to make an example," Brenda said firmly. "New residents need to understand that we have standards here." Douglas cleared his throat. "Ms. Amy, would you like to respond to these allegations?" Amy stood up, taking her portfolio with her. She didn't go to the table. Instead, she stayed in front of it, facing both the board and the audience of neighbors. "I'd like to start by properly introducing myself," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Because I realize that in the 6 months I've lived here, I haven't really had the chance to get to know everyone. My name is Amy Peterson. I moved here from upstate to take care of my mother during her final illness. She passed away 4 months ago, She paused, letting that sink in. The room had gone completely quiet. I work as a real estate attorney, Amy continued. Specifically, I specialize in property law and HOA regulations. I've been practicing for 12 years, and I've handled over 300 cases involving homeowners associations, property disputes, and community governance. She saw Brenda's face go pale. Douglas sat up straighter in his chair. I didn't mention this before because honestly I was focused on other things, taking care of my mom, grieving, trying to figure out my new life. But when I received Ms. Richardson's complaint, I did what I always do. I read the bylaws, all 83 pages. Amy opened her portfolio and pulled out a highlighted copy of the HOA bylaws. Ms. Richardson claims that my yard sale violated Section 12, Paragraph 7 of our bylaws. Let me read that section for everyone. She flipped to the marked page. It states, "No resident shall operate an ongoing commercial business from their residential property without written approval from the board. This includes but is not limited to retail operations, service businesses, and commercial workshops." She looked up. The key word there is ongoing. This bylaw is about running businesses from your home, not about having a single yard sale. In fact, if you continue reading Section 12, Paragraph 9 specifically states, "Occasional personal sales events, including yard sales, garage sales, and estate sales, are permitted without prior approval, provided they do not exceed 3 days in duration and do not occur more than twice per calendar year." Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. That's not how I interpreted it. It's not about interpretation, Amy said gently but firmly. It's about what's actually written. Your interpretation doesn't override the clear language of the bylaw. Douglas was flipping through his own copy now, his finger tracing down the page. She's right. It does say that. Amy wasn't finished. But let's talk about procedure because that's actually the bigger issue here. According to Section 23 of the bylaws, any complaint filed by a board member must be reviewed and validated by at least 2 other board members before formal action is taken. Was that done? Douglas looked at Brenda. Did you have other board members review this first? I sent emails to everyone. I assumed sending emails isn't the same as formal review, Amy said. The bylaws require a documented process to prevent any single board member from having too much power. It's a check and balance system. Jennifer, the younger board member, raised her hand tentatively. I got the emails, but I thought this was just Brenda informing us. I didn't realize I was supposed to review and approve. That's because proper procedure wasn't followed, Amy said. She pulled out another document. I'd also like to point out that according to Section 25, residents have the right to submit evidence and statements in their defense before any fine is assessed. I was told to come to this meeting, but the fine amount was already determined before I had a chance to present my case. That's a violation of due process. One of the older board members who'd been quiet until now spoke up. Young lady, you seem to know an awful lot about this. I should. It's my job. Amy smiled slightly. I've written amicus briefs on HOA law. I've testified as an expert witness in property disputes. I literally teach a continuing education course on this subject for other attorneys. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Tom was grinning from ear to ear. Now, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, Amy continued, her tone softening. I understand that board members are volunteers who do their best to maintain the community. But I do need to point out some concerns. She pulled out another set of papers. I've received statements from multiple neighbors about similar situations where Ms. Richardson has filed complaints that don't seem to align with the actual bylaws. Last year, the Johnson family was required to build an enclosure for their garbage cans. But Section 15 only requires that trash cans be stored out of sight by end of day on collection days. It doesn't mandate permanent structures. Douglas was looking more uncomfortable by the minute. The Martinez family on Maple Street was threatened with fines over Christmas lights. But our bylaws don't have any restrictions on holiday decorations. The Henderson family was told their bird feeder violated lawn ornament rules. But the bylaw about lawn ornaments specifically exempts bird feeders and bird baths. Amy paused, making eye contact with each board member. These aren't just innocent mistakes. This is a pattern of misrepresenting the rules to harass residents. And frankly, it needs to stop. Brenda shot to her feet. How dare you? I've served this community for 8 years. I've protected our property values and maintained our standards. Have you? Amy asked quietly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been bullying people who don't know their rights. This is outrageous. Douglas, are you going to let her speak to me this way? But Douglas was still reading through the bylaws, his expression growing darker. Brenda, did you really tell the Johnsons they had to build a trash enclosure? They needed one. The cans were visible from the street, but the bylaw doesn't require that. The spirit of the bylaw, we enforce what's written, not what you think the spirit is, Douglas said, his voice firm for the first time that evening. Amy decided to deliver her final point. There's one more thing I think the board should know. While researching this, I discovered that Ms. Richardson's own property has several violations. Brenda's eyes went wide. That's a lie. Your back fence exceeds the height limit specified in Section 17 by 8 inches. I measured it myself. And your house was repainted last spring in a color that isn't on the approved list in the architectural guidelines. The approved colors were updated 3 years ago, but you're using a shade from the old list. The room erupted. Neighbors were talking excitedly. Jennifer was frantically taking notes. Douglas looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. This meeting is getting out of hand, Douglas said, banging his hand on the table like a gavel. I move that we dismiss the complaint against Ms. Peterson. The yard sale was clearly within the bounds of our bylaws. All in favor? 4 hands went up immediately. Brenda sat frozen, not voting. Motion passes. Douglas turned to Amy. Ms. Peterson, on behalf of the board, I apologize for this situation. You should never have been put through this. Amy nodded. I appreciate that. And I'd like to make an offer. What kind of offer? Your bylaws need work. They're poorly organized, sometimes contradictory, and leave too much room for misinterpretation. I'd be willing to review them and help draft revisions on a pro bono basis. For the good of the community. Douglas looked relieved. We would be extremely grateful for that. Brenda gathered her binders and stormed toward the door. But before she could leave, Mrs. Chen's voice called out from the back. Before she goes, I'd like to file a formal complaint about harassment. 3 other people stood up. Me too. Brenda froze in the doorway, her face bright red. Then she pushed through and disappeared into the parking lot. Amy sat back down, her hands shaking slightly. Tom came up and squeezed her shoulder. Kevin gave her a high five. Mrs. Chen hugged her. The meeting dissolved into excited chatter as neighbors stayed to talk and thank Amy for speaking up. She'd come here expecting a fight, and she'd gotten one. But she'd also gotten something she hadn't expected. She'd gotten a community. The morning after the meeting, Amy woke up to find her phone buzzing with text messages. Neighbors she'd never spoken to before were reaching out, thanking her, asking questions, sharing their own stories about Brenda. By the time she finished her coffee, she had 17 messages waiting. Mrs. Chen had sent a long text about how Brenda had forced her to remove a small bench from her front porch 3 years ago, claiming it violated some rule about porch furniture. Kevin wrote about the car sale incident in more detail. A woman named Patricia from 2 blocks over described how Brenda had reported her for having a non-conforming mailbox, even though Patricia had just moved. And then the mailbox came with the house. The stories kept coming. Each one made Amy angrier at how long this had been going on, but also more determined to fix things. Around 10 in the morning, Douglas called. Amy, I wanted to apologize again for last night, he said, sounding tired. I've been president of this board for 3 years, and I had no idea Brenda was interpreting the bylaws so loosely. Or that she'd been harassing so many people. How did she get away with it for so long? Douglas sighed. Honestly, most of us on the board have full-time jobs and families. We treat this like a side responsibility, just trying to keep things running smoothly. Brenda always seemed so organized and knowledgeable. We trusted her judgment. That was clearly a mistake. It happens more often than you'd think, Amy said. HOAs can be breeding grounds for small-time tyrants if there aren't proper checks and balances. Well, I'd like to take you up on your offer to review our bylaws. The board met this morning, emergency session, without Brenda. We all agree that we need professional help to clean this up. I'm happy to help. When do you want to start? As soon as possible. Also, he hesitated. We've received 4 formal harassment complaints against Brenda since last night. We're going to have to hold a hearing. This is turning into a real mess. Amy spent the afternoon going through the HOA bylaws more carefully, this time making detailed notes about every section that needed revision. The more she read, the more problems she found. Vague language, contradictory rules, procedures that didn't make sense. No wonder Brenda had been able to twist things to her advantage. That evening, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find a man in his 50s standing on her porch looking uncomfortable and apologetic. "Hi, I'm Richard Richardson. I'm Brenda's husband." Amy's first instinct was to close the door, but something about his expression stopped her. He looked genuinely distressed. "Can I have just 5 minutes of your time?" he asked. "Please?" Against her better judgment, Amy stepped out onto the porch, leaving the door open behind her. 5 minutes, Richard rubbed his face. "I want to apologize for my wife's behavior. What she did to you, and apparently to a lot of other people in this neighborhood, was wrong. There's no excuse for it, Nair. Does she know you're here?" "No, she's barely speaking to me right now. But I felt like I needed to say something." He looked down at his shoes. Brenda's been going through a rough time. She retired 2 years ago after 30 years as an office manager. She loved her job, loved being in charge, loved organizing things. When she retired, she kind of lost her purpose. The HOA became her new job, but she took it way too far. Amy felt a small twinge of sympathy, but it didn't erase what Brenda had done. That explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. I know. I'm not asking you to forgive her or forget what happened. I just wanted you to know that she's not a monster. She's a person who made really bad choices and hurt a lot of people in the process. He pulled out a business card. I'm a counselor. I work with people dealing with life transitions. I've been trying to get Brenda to see someone, to talk about her retirement and her identity issues, but she's been resistant. Maybe now she'll listen. I hope she does, Amy said honestly, because what she's been doing isn't healthy for her or anyone else. Richard nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think what you did took a lot of courage. Standing up to someone like that isn't easy, even when you know you're right. After he left, Amy sat on her porch steps for a while thinking. It was easy to see Brenda as just a villain, but Richard's visit had complicated that picture. She was still angry about what Brenda had done, but she could also see that it came from a place of loss and trying to feel important again. It didn't excuse the behavior, but it made it more human. The next few days were busy. Amy set up a meeting with the full HOA board and spent 4 hours going through the bylaws section by section, explaining what needed to be changed and why. Douglas and the other board members took notes, asked questions, and looked increasingly embarrassed by how poorly the original bylaws had been written. "I'm amazed we haven't been sued," Jennifer said at one point. "You probably would have been eventually," Amy replied. "These bylaws leave you vulnerable to all kinds of legal challenges." She also started meeting with individual neighbors who wanted to talk about their experiences with Brenda. Tom invited her over for dinner and spent an hour describing how Brenda had tried to force him to remove a vegetable garden from his backyard, claiming it was agricultural use prohibited by the bylaws. "I spent $300 on lawyer consultations just to prove she was wrong," Tom said, shaking his head. "Most people don't have that kind of money to fight back, so they just comply even when Brenda's making stuff up." Patricia, the woman with the mailbox issue, brought over cookies and cried while describing how Brenda's harassment had made her feel unwelcome in her own neighborhood. "I almost moved," she admitted. "I'd only been here 2 months and I was already looking at other houses. This was supposed to be my fresh start after my divorce." Each story added to the picture of how much damage Brenda had done. It wasn't just about the rules or the fines. It was about making people feel unsafe and unwelcome in their own homes. By Friday, Amy had drafted a complete revision of the HOA bylaws. She'd simplified the language, removed contradictions, added clear procedures for complaints and appeals, and included specific protections for residents' rights. She'd also added a section about board member conduct and term limits. "This is incredible," Douglas said when she sent him the draft. "You've done in a week what we should have done years ago." "Well, you had someone telling you everything was fine when it wasn't." The following Tuesday, the board held their hearing about the harassment complaints against Brenda. Amy wasn't required to attend, but she went anyway, sitting in the back row with Tom and Kevin. Brenda showed up looking smaller somehow, less imposing than she'd been at the previous meeting. She sat alone at a table while, one by one, neighbors described how she'd harassed them, threatened them, and made their lives difficult over minor or non-existent violations. It was hard to watch. Amy found herself feeling sorry for Brenda, even after everything. When it was over, The board voted unanimously to remove Brenda from her position and ban her from holding any board position for the next 5 years. Brenda left without a word, her face red and her eyes wet. Later that evening, Amy was in her kitchen when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Amy, it's Brenda." Amy's grip tightened on the phone. "Hello?" There was a long pause. I needed to call in." Brenda's voice cracked. "I'm sorry. For everything. The yard sale, the threats, all of it. You were right. About all of it. I was wrong." Amy didn't know what to say. She'd expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even another attack. Not this. "I've been meeting with a therapist," Brenda continued, "trying to figure out why I did what I did, why I treated people that way. It doesn't excuse anything, but I'm trying to understand it so I can be better." "That's good," Amy said carefully. "That takes courage. I don't expect forgiveness from you or anyone else. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that you were brave to stand up to me. More people should have done it sooner. Maybe then I would have realized what I was becoming." After they hung up, Amy sat at her kitchen table for a long time, staring at her phone. Life was complicated. People were complicated. Brenda had done real harm, but she was also a person struggling with her own issues, trying to find meaning after a major life change. It didn't make what she'd done okay, but it made it understandable. That weekend, Amy held her second yard sale. This time, she put up a notice in the community newsletter and made sure everything was by the book, even though she didn't have to. The sale was packed with neighbors who came as much to support her as to shop. Mrs. Chen bought more teacups. Tom got some of her mom's old records. Patricia found a beautiful quilt for her new bedroom. Kevin walked away with a box of vintage comic books. But the best part wasn't the sales. It was the conversations, the laughter, the feeling of being part of something. Amy sold the last of her mother's dishes to a young couple who promised to use them at their wedding. As she wrapped them in newspaper, she thought about everything that had happened since that first sale. The conflict, the confrontation, the community that had formed in the aftermath. Her mom would have been proud, not just of how Amy had stood up for herself, but of how she'd helped others find their voices too. Sometimes standing up to a bully wasn't just about winning. It was about showing everyone else that bullies could be beaten, that rules could be questioned, that communities worked best when everyone had a voice, not just the loudest person with a clipboard. As the sun set and the last customers left, Amy looked around her neighborhood and smiled. This was home now. Really home. Not just a place she lived, but a place where she belonged. 3 months passed, and the neighborhood looked the same, but felt completely different. The new HOA bylaws had been officially adopted at a special meeting where nearly every resident showed up to vote. Amy had presented them section by section, explaining the changes in plain language that everyone could understand. The vote was unanimous. Even the people who hadn't been directly affected by Brenda's behavior could see that the new rules were fairer, clearer, and better for everyone. Douglas remained as president, but the board now had 3 new members, including Tom. They met monthly instead of quarterly, and every meeting included time for residents to voice concerns or ask questions. The minutes were posted online within 48 hours. Everything was transparent now. Most importantly, there were new rules about how complaints were handled. No single board member could act alone. Every complaint had to be reviewed by at least 3 people, and residents had the right to respond in writing before any action was taken. The days of Brenda-style harassment were over. Amy had become something of a neighborhood celebrity, though she wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention. People stopped her at the grocery store to thank her. New neighbors sought her out for advice. She'd helped 2 families fight unfair fines they'd received before the new bylaws took effect, and both cases had been resolved in the homeowner's favor. But the best part was simpler than all of that. She had friends now. Real friends. She had dinner with Tom and his wife every other week. Kevin's golden retriever had become a regular visitor to her front yard, and she'd started keeping dog treats by the door. Mrs. Chen taught her how to make dumplings on Sunday afternoons. Patricia had introduced her to a book club that met monthly at the community center. For the first time since her mother died, Amy didn't feel alone. One Saturday morning in early spring, Amy was working in her front garden when she heard footsteps on the sidewalk. She looked up to see Brenda walking past, heading toward the neighborhood park. It was the first time Amy had seen her in weeks. "Good morning," Amy called out, surprising herself. Brenda stopped, looking uncertain. "Good morning." They stood there for a moment in awkward silence. Brenda looked different. She'd cut her hair shorter, and she wasn't wearing the designer workout clothes Amy remembered. She looked more relaxed somehow. "Less rigid, how are you doing?" Amy asked. "Better, actually. I've been seeing that therapist regularly, and I've been volunteering at the public library downtown, helping with their community programs." Brenda managed a small smile. "Turns out I'm pretty good at organizing things when I'm not using it as a weapon." Amy laughed, and after a moment Brenda did too. "I really am sorry," Brenda said, more seriously now. "For everything. I think about it a lot. All the people I hurt because I was trying to feel important." "We all make mistakes," Amy said. "What matters is that you're working to do better." Richard says the same thing, though I think he's just being nice. Brenda glanced toward the park. "I started a walking group, actually, for retired people in the area, not just our neighborhood. We meet 3 mornings a week. It's been good to have something to do that doesn't involve judging people." "That sounds really nice. You should join us sometime, if you want." Brenda said it quickly, like she was afraid of being rejected. "I mean, I know that might be weird, but the invitation is there." "I might do that," Amy said, and she meant it. After Brenda continued her walk, Amy sat back on her heels and thought about second chances, about how people could change when they recognized their mistakes and put in the work. Her mother had always believed in giving people room to grow. Maybe this was what she'd meant. That afternoon, Amy was organizing her garage when she found one last box of her mother's things she'd missed. It was full of old photographs, letters, and her mom's journal from the last year of her life. Amy carried it inside and spent the next few hours going through it, laughing and crying in equal measure. One journal entry, dated about a year before her mom's diagnosis, caught Amy's attention. "I worry sometimes that Amy works too hard and doesn't make time for herself," her mother had written. "She's so focused on her career, on being successful, that I think she forgets to build a life outside of work. I hope she finds a place where she feels connected, where she has people who care about her, not just colleagues and clients. Everyone needs a community." Amy closed the journal and wiped her eyes. Her mom had always known what she needed, even before Amy knew it herself. Moving here, as hard as it had been, had given her exactly that. A community, a place to belong. The following month, the HOA threw a neighborhood spring barbecue. It was the first community event in 3 years, and almost everyone showed up. There were games for kids, a potluck table overflowing with food, and a playlist of classic rock that Tom had put together. Amy brought her mother's famous potato salad, made from the recipe she'd found in that journal. It was gone within an hour. She spent the afternoon talking with neighbors, playing cornhole with Kevin, and helping Mrs. Chen set up a crafts table for the children. It felt good, normal, like this was how neighborhoods were supposed to work. Douglas pulled her aside at one point. "I wanted to thank you again, not just for the bylaws, but for what you did. You could have just paid the fine and moved on. Instead, you stood up and changed everything." "I wasn't going to let someone bully me in my own home," Amy said. "My mom taught me better than that." "Well, your mom raised a hell of a daughter." Amy noticed Brenda sitting alone at a picnic table near the edge of the park, watching the festivities but not really participating. She looked lonely. After a moment's hesitation, Amy walked over. "Mind if I sit?" Brenda looked surprised. "Are you sure you want to?" "I'm sure." Amy sat down. "How's the library volunteering going?" "Really well, actually. We just started a program teaching seniors how to use computers and social media. Turns out I'm good at explaining technology." Brenda smiled slightly. Who knew? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the neighborhood kids chase each other around the playground. "I don't expect everyone to forgive me," Brenda said quietly. "Most people here still cross the street when they see me coming. I don't blame them. It takes time. Keep doing the work. Keep being better. Eventually people will see it. Why are you being nice to me? After everything I did?" Amy thought about that. "Because my mom always said that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. And because I think you're genuinely trying to change, that deserves acknowledgement." Brenda's eyes got watery. Thank you. That means more than you know. As the sun started to set, families began packing up and heading home. Amy helped clean up, loading trash bags and folding chairs. Tom caught up with her as she was carrying the last of the supplies to the storage shed. Hey, some of us are thinking about starting a neighborhood watch program. You know, the kind that actually watches out for each other instead of watching to report each other. Interested? Definitely. Great. We're meeting Tuesday night at my place. I'll send you the details. Walking home, Amy felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of grief because she still missed her mom every single day, but peace in knowing that she was building something here. A life, a home, a place where she mattered and was valued. She thought about that first yard sale, about Brenda's threats and intimidation, about how scared and alone she'd felt. It seemed like years ago instead of just a few months. Everything had changed because she'd decided to stand up instead of backing down. That night, Amy sat on her back porch with a glass of wine and her mother's journal. She read through more entries, smiling at her mom's observations about life, love, and the importance of being true to yourself. The last entry, written just a week before her mom went into the hospital for the final time, said simply, "I hope Amy knows how proud I am of her. Not because of her career or her accomplishments, but because of who she is. She's strong and brave and kind. She stands up for what's right. She doesn't let anyone push her around. That's my girl." Amy closed the journal and looked up at the stars. "I hope I'm making you proud, Mom," she whispered. The neighborhood was quiet now, lights glowing in windows, families settling in for the evening. Amy thought about all the people behind those lights. Tom and his wife, Kevin and his dog, Mrs. Chen, Patricia, even Brenda working on being better. They were all just trying their best, making mistakes, learning, growing, building a community one day at a time. And Amy was part of it now. Not just a resident or a property owner, but a real member of this neighborhood. She'd found what her mother had hoped she'd find. Connection, purpose, people who cared. It had taken a confrontation with an HOA Karen to get here, which was ironic. But maybe that's how life worked sometimes. The hardest challenges led to the best outcomes. Standing up to a bully had given her a community. Fighting for what was right had given her friends. And honoring her mother's memory had given her a home. Amy finished her wine, looked at the stars one more time, and went inside. Tomorrow she'd wake up in a neighborhood that felt like hers. She'd wave to her neighbors, maybe stop and chat with Mrs. Chen, throw a ball for Kevin's dog. She'd lived the life her mother had wanted for her, and that, in the end, was the best revenge against anyone who tried to make her feel small. Not fighting back with anger, but building something better, creating the kind of community where people looked out for each other instead of looking for violations, where kindness mattered more than rules, where everyone had a voice and a place to belong. Brenda had reported her yard sale expecting to assert dominance and control. She hadn't expected the truth about Amy. But more than that, she hadn't expected what would happen when someone finally stood up and said enough, when someone turned intimidation into inspiration, when one person's courage gave everyone else permission to be brave. That was the real story. Not about defeating a bully, but about building something better in the aftermath, about turning a neighborhood into a community. And it all started with a yard sale and a woman who refused to back down.